I used to believe I had the perfect American family, the kind of suburban postcard life you'd find on a Walmart picture frame display. Backyard cookouts with too much Bud Light, neighbors waving from across freshly mowed lawns, my wife smiling in her yoga pants like she was auditioning for some sitcom about middle-class happiness. We had the grill, the two-car garage, and even that cheesy chalkboard in the kitchen where she wrote, "Family is everything" in cursive like she was trying to trademark the word love. But here's the thing about suburbia. It's all fake. A Truman Show staged by people who are one breakdown away from running off with their kid's soccer coach. I should have seen it earlier, but I didn't, because I was too busy being the good husband, the good dad, the provider, the guy who still thought loyalty was a sacred contract, until I learned that my wife had rewritten the contract without telling me, and in her new version, the fine print included our neighbor's husband sneaking in through the side gate like he was Amazon Prime, delivering betrayal right to my doorstep. The discovery didn't hit me like a hammer. It was more like one of those slow-burn Netflix documentaries where you already know the ending, but you still binge it because you can't stop. At first, it was small. The late-night texts she swore were Pinterest boards, the sudden obsession with running errands that somehow always ended with her hair a little too messy, her perfume a little too faded. Then there was the sweater. Oh yes, the infamous sweater. It wasn't mine, wasn't hers, but it smelled like Old Spice and midlife crisis. That was when the conspiracy part of my brain lit up. I became the suburban FBI, watching, tracking, connecting dots with thumbtacks and red string. Call it paranoia, call it toxic love, but I started treating my own marriage like a true crime podcast. And here's where the American satire writes itself. Of all the men in the world, of all the possible strangers she could have chosen to destroy my faith in family, she picked the neighbor's husband. You know, the guy with the lawn that always looked better than mine, the guy who bragged about his fantasy football league as if ESPN would call him any day, the guy who made ribs so good at block parties even I went back for seconds. That guy. He wasn't just my neighbor, he was my rival in every dumb suburban competition, and now apparently in bed too. The betrayal didn't just feel like cheating. It felt like she had joined forces with the enemy in a Cold War one didn't know we were fighting. But here's the kicker. I didn't confront her. Nope, I did nothing. You might think that makes me weak, some cuck character in a parody of marriage, but in reality, I was playing a longer game. Silence is underrated. Silence is how you let infidelity ferment into power. I let her think she was winning. I let her think her secret was safe, that I was oblivious, that she was clever. Meanwhile, I was sharpening the knife of knowledge, letting betrayal season itself until it was ready to be served as revenge. You want to know what toxic love looks like? It's pretending to still enjoy dinner while imagining the whole table catching fire and your cheating wife choking on the smoke. I became two people, the husband who smiled, grilled burgers, picked up the kids from school, and the shadow husband, the one who was scripting the documentary voiceover in my head. Here is the victim of suburban betrayal, a man whose family was a sitcom until it turned into a soap opera. Sometimes I laughed at the absurdity of it. I mean, who does this? Who destroys their family for a neighbor's husband who can't even fix his own gutter? But that's what makes infidelity so American. It's never logical. It's impulsive. It's fast food betrayal, greasy and shameful, and yet irresistible. At night, I would lie in bed next to her, pretending to be asleep, while she scrolled through her phone like a teenager hiding TikTok from her parents. Every tap, every swipe was a Morse code of deceit. And I'd think, this is what marriage has come to. A war of screens and silence, a battlefield of glances and unspoken truths. The toxic love was seeping into my veins, but instead of killing me, it was transforming me. The pain became adrenaline. The humiliation became strategy. I wasn't the loser in this story. I was the writer. And if she wanted to play this game of cheating and betrayal, then I would let her. Because in the end, Infidelity wasn't her weapon anymore. It was mine. So I said nothing. Nothing at all. I smiled at barbecues. I waved at the neighbors. I tucked my kids into bed like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was building something, planning something, waiting for the perfect moment when the mask would slip and the whole neighborhood would see what I already knew, that my wife's toxic love affair with our neighbor's husband wasn't just the scandal of the cul-de-sac. It was the beginning of my revenge story. I used to think silence was weakness, but in the suburbs, silence is power. Everyone pretends here anyway, pretends the credit cards aren't maxed out, pretends their kid is a future NFL quarterback when he can barely catch, pretends the marriage hasn't rotted from the inside, so why not me? Why not let my wife's cheating simmer in the crock-pot of suburban hypocrisy until it was fully cooked? At barbecues, I stood right next to the neighbor's husband, the very man who was sneaking into my bed when I wasn't there, flipping burgers side by side like a toxic love duet. He'd brag about his ribs recipe while I thought, "Buddy, you already stole the recipe for betrayal. Maybe leave me the brisket." My wife, meanwhile, fluttered around with her plastic smile, passing potato salad like she wasn't smuggling infidelity across property lines. It was performance art. Inside, though, my mind turned into a conspiracy factory. You know those shows where the paranoid guy has maps on the wall, red strings connecting faces, pins marking possible sightings? That was me, except my map was the neighborhood cul-de-sac, and the crime scene was my own family. I started connecting her yoga classes with his sudden late-night runs to Home Depot. I knew damn well nobody needs that many screws and nails. Unless, of course, he was screwing something else. Call it paranoia, but I prefer to think of it as amateur detective work. Suburban surveillance. Every text alert, every car door slamming outside, it all became evidence in the trial of betrayal. The funniest part, in the darkest way possible, was how normal everything looked on the outside. The kids still had birthday parties, the neighbors still waved, Amazon still dropped off packages of useless junk we didn't need. That's the real American satire. You can live in a picture-perfect house while the foundation is crumbling into infidelity quicksand. I'd watch my wife set the dinner table like we were in some magazine ad for family values and think, these plates are props, this meatloaf is a lie, this entire meal is a hostage situation. And still, I said nothing, not one word. I played my role like an Oscar-winning actor in the tragedy comedy called My Cheating Wife. Sometimes I wanted to break the fourth wall, just stand up at dinner and yell, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's episode of Betrayal Boulevard." In today's episode, our toxic love heroine thinks she's fooling her family, but little does she know her husband is plotting the ultimate revenge. But no, I kept the mask on. Silence wasn't just survival, it was entertainment. Watching her squirm when I casually mentioned the neighbor's name, seeing her drop her fork just slightly, those were my secret victories. Cheating had turned her into a bad actress, and I was the only one who knew the script. The neighborhood, of course, was its own Greek chorus of gossip. You could feel their whispers. Americans love two things: barbecues and scandals. And let me tell you, a cheating wife is better than Netflix out here. The lady across the street who spends her days spying through blinds probably had more intel on my marriage than I did. She'd wave at me with that pity smile, the kind people give when they know your life is a reality show and they've already watched the next episode. I almost wanted to knock on her door and say, "Don't spoil it. I'm still binge-watching my own misery." But something was shifting inside me. The silence wasn't just building tension, it was transforming me. I started to see how her infidelity, her betrayal, wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of a new one. Every fake smile I gave at a family barbecue, every nod I gave to the neighbor's husband was a rehearsal for the grand finale. I was becoming sharper, colder, more deliberate. The old me, the guy who believed in family first, the guy who thought love was unconditional, was dead. In his place was someone who saw love for what it really was, a contract signed in invisible ink, easily burned by betrayal. And the strangest part? I started to enjoy the act. I started to enjoy knowing more than she thought I knew. It was intoxicating, like having a secret superpower. My wife thought she was manipulating the story, but in reality, I was the narrator, and she was just a character spiraling toward her downfall. Infidelity wasn't breaking me. It was arming me. Her cheating wasn't the disease. It was the cure for my complacency. This wasn't toxic love anymore. This was radioactive revenge, glowing hotter every day. By now, the silence wasn't heavy. It was hilarious. I would watch her laugh too hard at the neighbor's dumb jokes, touch his arm just a second too long, and I'd think, "Keep going, sweetheart. Dig the hole deeper. You're building my weapon for me. I don't even need to swing it. Just watching you sweat when I finally point it out will be enough." Betrayal had stopped being her sin and had become my leverage. She thought she was clever, but she was just writing me the best revenge story the neighborhood had ever seen. And I wasn't going to spoil the ending early. So I stayed quiet. I mowed the lawn, took out the trash, kissed my kids goodnight. But in my head, I wasn't a suburban dad anymore. I was the director of a dark comedy called Infidelity, the Silent War. And in that war, silence wasn't defeat. Silence was the weapon. Revenge doesn't arrive with a trumpet blast or a marching band, at least not in my cul-de-sac. No, revenge sneaks in like an HOA fee increase, quiet, subtle, impossible to ignore once it hits your wallet. By this point, I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was something else, something sharper. My wife thought she was playing me, thought her cheating was just a side hustle she could manage like an Etsy shop. But she forgot the first rule of toxic love. Every secret eventually demands rent. And I was the landlord. It started small. I dropped hints, casual, cruel, surgical. At breakfast, I'd say, "You know, it's amazing how much time Home Depot stays open these days. Imagine all the things a man could buy late at night." Her fork would freeze halfway to her mouth. She'd laugh too loud, like she was auditioning for the role of innocent wife in a bad sitcom. Inside, I was dying of amusement. This was better than Netflix, better than football, better than whatever she thought she was getting out of infidelity. Watching her crack under my silence was my new entertainment. The beauty of it was I never accused her. I never yelled. No dramatic "I know what you did" scene. Americans love courtroom drama, but I wasn't giving her Law and Order. I was giving her Hitchcock. Slow suspense, the dread creeping in. My silence became her paranoia. She couldn't tell if I knew or if I was just clueless. That was the point. Betrayal isn't just about the cheating. It's about control. And now the control was mine. She started to slip. She'd check her phone too fast when I walked into the room, laugh nervously when I mentioned the neighbor's name, burn dinner because she was too busy staring at me, trying to decode my face like it was a CIA document. And I just smiled. I smiled because her toxic love wasn't a dagger in my chest anymore. It was a leash around her neck. The neighbor's husband? Oh, he was easy. He swaggered around like a man who thought he'd won some secret suburban trophy. The king of betrayal, master of affairs. I'd shake his hand at block parties, grip it a little too tight, hold eye contact a little too long. He'd flinch, just slightly, like he felt the trap closing, but couldn't see it yet. That was my revenge, making him sweat in broad daylight, while everyone else thought we were just two dads, arguing over who grilled the better burger. But here's where the satire got real. The neighborhood itself started turning into a pressure cooker. People talk. People notice. Americans might ignore politics, but they never ignore gossip on their own street. The woman across the street with her binoculars practically wrote a full-length novel about our little love triangle. In her head. Every smile, every glance between my wife and the neighbor's husband, it all became a subplot in the soap opera of suburban life. And I knew one thing about gossip. It's the most efficient weapon ever invented. Faster than bullets, louder than bombs, more permanent than tattoos. So I started feeding it subtly, carefully. A joke here, a sarcastic remark there. Funny how the Johnsons and we always seem to have the same schedule, huh? I'd say with a grin, letting the words hang in the air. Or, at a barbecue, when my wife laughed a little too much at the neighbor's joke, I'd chuckle and say, "Careful, honey, people might think you two are married." The crowd would laugh, but someone always squinted, always whispered later. It was like planting seeds of betrayal in every lawn of the neighborhood, and the grass grew fast. The effect on my wife was glorious. She became jumpy, anxious, trapped in a play where she no longer controlled the script. Every time she looked at me, she saw not her husband, but the man who might at any moment expose her. Infidelity had turned her into a prisoner in her own home. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to leave. My revenge was silence. My betrayal was patience. My toxic love strategy was letting her drown in her own guilt. And the best part? I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't clinging to the fantasy of a perfect family. Family was an illusion, a stage prop, and I had seen behind the curtain. Love wasn't unconditional, it was transactional, fragile, paper thin. Betrayal had ripped the mask off, and what I saw underneath wasn't heartbreak, it was power. I realized I didn't need her approval, her lies, her scripted affection. I didn't need to be the victim of cheating. I could be the director of it. So I sharpened the weapon, not literally, though I did once hold a steak knife at dinner and imagine the headline, "Suburban Husband Snaps Over Potato Salad Betrayal." No, my weapon was subtler, her own fear. I let her stew in it, let her panic every time I came home late, wondering if I'd been talking to lawyers, to neighbors, to anyone who might spill her secret. I became the ghost in her story, the presence she couldn't escape. That's what real revenge looks like. Not the dramatic explosion, but the slow, careful suffocation of control. By now, even I was laughing at the absurdity of it all. Here we were, two adults, two supposed pillars of a suburban community, locked in a silent war of betrayal and revenge. The neighbors thought we were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, we were toxic love personified. And the longer I waited, the sharper my victory became. Because one day I knew she'd realize the truth. Her infidelity wasn't her secret anymore. It was mine. And secrets are only powerful when you control them. The thing about secrets is they rot faster than milk in the sun. By the time I decided to cash in on my wife's infidelity, it had already spoiled the air around us. You could feel it in the house, smell it between the drywall, like mold nobody wants to admit exists. But unlike mold, this wasn't going to eat me alive. No, this was the moment I'd been sharpening for months. I had turned silence into a weapon, and now it was time to pull the trigger. It didn't happen in a courtroom or a dramatic bedroom showdown or a Jerry Springer special, though honestly, the story deserved all three. No, my revenge climaxed in the most American way possible, at a neighborhood barbecue. Because what better stage for betrayal than the altar of burgers, beer, and potato salad? Everyone was there, kids splashing in the pool, dads comparing lawnmowers, moms pretending their marriages were solid while secretly eyeing who was drinking too much Chardonnay. And of course, my wife and the neighbor's husband, both wearing their practiced poker faces, laughing too loudly, moving too casually, thinking they were still the best actors in this sitcom. I didn't plan to expose them outright. That would have been too easy, too blunt. My revenge wasn't about screaming the truth. It was about letting the truth ripen until it stank so badly everyone noticed. So I played host. I poured drinks, flipped burgers, gave speeches about family that dripped with irony so thick you could taste it. And then, casually, almost as if I didn't mean to, I let the bomb drop. "Funny thing about neighbors," I said, raising my beer. "Sometimes they borrow sugar, sometimes they borrow your lawn tools, and sometimes, well, they borrow things you never thought they would." The crowd laughed nervously. My wife froze, mid-laugh. The neighbor's husband choked on his hot dog. And just like that, the backyard was quieter than a church on Monday morning. You could see it in their faces, the suspicion, the calculation, the whispered betrayal spreading like wildfire through the cul-de-sac. I didn't have to say names. I didn't have to point fingers. The silence filled in the blanks. That was the brilliance of it. From that moment, the gossip machine went into overdrive. The neighbor's wife stormed out halfway through dessert. My wife's smile cracked like a broken mask. By the next morning, everyone knew. You can't contain gossip in America. It's the national pastime. And my revenge was complete because I never had to accuse, never had to prove. I simply planted the seed and let the neighborhood water it with whispers. My wife tried damage control, of course. Tears, apologies, promises, the whole "I'll do anything to fix our family" routine. But here's the thing. There was no family left to fix. Family had been the stage set, the painted backdrop, and behind it was just betrayal and infidelity and the ruins of toxic love. I let her cry, let her beg, but I didn't bend. Because I finally understood. I didn't need her. I didn't need the illusion. I didn't need to keep playing the fool in someone else's cheating sitcom. Revenge had burned all of that down, and in the ashes, I found myself. Was it petty? Of course. Was it cruel? Absolutely. But that's the nature of betrayal. It doesn't give you the option of kindness. Infidelity is war, and in war, you don't apologize for winning. My silence, my patience, my carefully timed strike, they weren't just acts of revenge. They were liberation. I wasn't her victim anymore. I was my own man again. I moved on quickly. Got a lawyer, got the papers, got my freedom. In the suburbs, divorce is just another lawn ornament, and mine was shinier than most. The neighbors watched, some with pity, some with admiration, but all with interest, because nothing entertains Americans like a scandal that isn't theirs. My kids adjusted. They always do, and even they seemed to sense that Dad was happier now, lighter, stronger. Betrayal had hurt me, yes, but it had also stripped me down to something raw and real. And my wife? Well, let's just say her empire of lies collapsed. The neighbor's wife divorced her husband. The man she'd risked it all for ended up moving out of the cul-de-sac, tail between his legs. And she was left alone, the queen of ashes, a reminder to everyone else that cheating isn't just infidelity. It's self-destruction disguised as passion. She thought her toxic love story would end in happily ever after. Instead, it ended in public humiliation and silence from the one man she thought would always play along. I won't pretend I walked away unscarred. Betrayal leaves its fingerprints on you forever. But those scars aren't weaknesses, they're trophies. Every time I look in the mirror, I don't see the man who was cheated on. I see the man who turned infidelity into fuel, who transformed betrayal into revenge, who took back control of his life without lifting a finger. That's not weakness, that's power. And that's the irony, isn't it? She thought her affair gave her control, gave her freedom, gave her something I couldn't. But in the end, it was her infidelity that gave me everything: clarity, strength, and the sweetest revenge of all, living better without her. So if you ask me now whether I'd go back, whether I'd erase the pain, whether I'd undo the betrayal. No, I wouldn't. Because without that cheating wife, without that toxic love, without that neighbor's smug little grin, I never would have discovered what freedom really tastes like. And let me tell you, it tastes a hell of a lot better than potato salad at a suburban barbecue.